Like the great poet of The Who said, Tommy, can you hear me? All right, let's hear it. This is The Real Story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two broker associates talk about all things real estate. Hey, Sherry, how you doing?
Good, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a busy week, and I feel like we survived. How are you
So
feeling?
so far,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, we got a couple closings this week, maybe one today,
Yep,
which is nice.
a
And
big one.
yeah, and then another one for a client that really we've been working with for like 6 years, so that's super exciting.
Yes.
At one point, they gave us Starbucks gift cards and said, "Thanks, we're just going to stay put."
Uh-huh. And a week, literally a week later, called and said, "Oh, we just went to an open house and we found our dream home. And can you write an offer for us?"
Yeah, yeah, and they
That was
went,
funny.
yeah, and they span the gamut of buying first and then selling, and so we're coming to the end of that anxiety period where they're paying two mortgages and
Yep,
all the costs of owning two homes and
yep,
get trying to get it ready. So,
yeah.
very excited for them that we're going to cross that finish line.
Oh, I'm gonna miss them. I really like them. That's the thing about our business is, we close escrow and then our clients go off and go back to their lives and
Uh,
we miss them sometimes.
exactly. Well, they have a child that is very bright, a young child, and has been listening to all these conversations, I'm sure even just between mom and dad, but then
Uh,
also with us about how to buy a house, how to sell a
yeah.
house. And it's really like on point. He will sometimes wander into the room when the Zoom call is going on and give some unsolicited advice that is spot on. Like
Well, didn't he do that when we were writing an offer on the house they eventually bought? He was giving
absolutely.
advice about multiple offers.
He said like, "Oh, you got to offer 5,000 more to convince them that you really want it."
Is he like 10, 9 or 10 years
I'm
old?
not sure, but very bright,
Yeah.
very perceptive.
Yeah.
And
Well, we should have him get his license and join our team.
yeah. Uh, well, actually, I was going to describe him as being a good listener, and that's kind of our topic for today. So
Yes,
maybe we'll just transition into that.
absolutely. Yes,
Uh,
he's listening to somebody for sure.
yes. Well, a couple weeks ago, Sherry and I had the opportunity to do an in-house training for our brokerage, and we were focusing on the client-agent relationship and how important that is. Like we can know everything about contracts and houses and everything else, but if you can't master that relationship, it's going to be hard to be successful in this field.
Yep.
And one of the areas that we talked about in particular was communication.
It's an
And
important part of what we do.
yeah, I'm just curious about uh, when we think about communication, what's the first thing that you think about when we talk about communication with clients?
Um, I think about saying to them, tell me everything I need to know to help you achieve your goals.
Right. Yeah.
And then step
So
back
you
and listening to them.
and that's really key is that your first posture when you think about communication is listening to our clients. Um, w- did you bring that skill set from your previous career, or did you learn how to do that as an agent?
I probably brought it from my previous career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So uh, Sherry was in advertising prior to real estate and had some high-end clients, companies like Visa and Apple. I'm kind of curious, like, how did you figure out that not how did you figure out how to listen to those clients, but what were some of the like they seem like they have to have it their way. So how did you figure out that you knew what their way was?
Sometimes I knew what they wanted before they knew what they wanted. My job was to turn artwork into printing materials, usually for ads, sometimes for collateral materials, but they would deliver the artwork. The clients would deliver the artwork to me. We would scan it and we would make a proof and I would take it over and we'd step into a light box, a color corrected light box, and I would put the proof up on the wall and everybody would look at it and they would make corrections to it. So, and there were two kinds of corrections. One was color correction and the other was physical retouching. So I did a lot of work for Levi's, and you can imagine the kind of retouching we would do on a Levi's model.
Yeah.
Someone that I thought looked perfectly fine, but make the waist smaller, make this bigger, make that. And so my job was technical, but I was dealing with creative people and they didn't understand technology. They didn't know to say, I need 5% more cyan in the midtones. So they would describe to me what they were hoping to have or hoping to have at the end result. And I had one client named Jean Zeidler. Jean, I wonder if you're listening. And she was so good at describing what she wanted. And she would say things like, I want it to be an Arizona sunset at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh, it just sounds beautiful thinking about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And it was like, okay, I knew what she wanted. I translated that to technical terms.
Oh, that's
And
really fascinating.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Because we were speaking two different languages, but
yeah,
we
yeah.
wanted to achieve the same result. And if someone could describe to me what they were looking for in those terms, I could turn it into printable artwork.
Did so I had to take a business communication class as part of my major, and I so my undergrad's in construction management, technical, not technical like tech, but technical like, the form has to be this big, the building has to be this high, numbers and facts and budgets, and we use flowery language like sunsets in Arizona.
Yeah.
And I was, and the teacher was advocating, professor was advocating that you use some what I felt like was superfluous language. It's like I
Mm,
just want to tell him the facts and I don't want to do all this other stuff. And he
yeah.
said to me, Mr. Hamalian, you're full of, and then use a swear word. And his point was, see, I told you the facts and you didn't like it. And I was so like taken back that this professor swore at me, but
Oh, wow.
I got the message. Like, part of communication is learning how to say things in a way that they can be heard.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that you bridge the gap from the technical side that these artists who maybe didn't understand the technical nature of what they were asking for, you communication was on you, the learner or the listener, as much as it was on them, the speaker. Is that kind of how you felt about it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You nailed it.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about then how does that translate into working with real estate clients?
Well, a couple of years ago, we got a phone call from a gentleman. I got a phone call from a gentleman who wanted to sell his 7 acres out on Bollinger Canyon Road. And he wanted us to come out and take a look at it and interview for the listing. And I ended up having an hour and a half long phone call with him, which is longer than most phone calls with prospective sellers. And at the end of that phone call, I kind of knew we were going to get that listing because he told me everything I needed to know about his experience with his previous agent and why he wasn't using her again and what he was looking for in his agent that he was looking to hire. And coming out of that hour and a half long conversation, I was able to say to you, when we go out there tomorrow, do not wear a suit like you usually do. I need you to wear blue jeans, and maybe a nice jacket, because this is not a suit guy. Even
Yeah.
though he was an attorney and a CPA, very intelligent, very highly educated, he was not a suit guy. He was living on 7 acres, out on Bollinger Canyon Road and dealing with everything you have to deal when you have that kind of acreage. Um, and anyway, I always use that as an example of what came out of that phone call. There were certainly other things that came out of that phone call. He told me that his agent who sold him the house many, many years ago drove a fancy Mercedes and, thought she could walk around on that property in her 4-inch spike heels. And she lost the listing because
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
She said to him when they were showing the property when they first bought it, "Why do you want to live out here?"
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what he wanted. That's what exactly what they were looking for. And she didn't realize that that sentence, you know, lost her the listing many years later. So,
One of the things that we were sharing with the agents we met with a couple weeks ago was if there's a gap between you and your clients, you need to move to fill the
yeah,
gap.
yeah,
And one of the things that was very easy about that working with that client was we showed up at that property and immediately you could feel the magic of the space. It was just this beautiful, serene, pastoral setting. In fact, the photo that we got captured our photographer captured at sunset, looking out Bollinger Canyon, was one that we used multiple times on our social media because it's such a pretty scene. And so
oh, gorgeous.
we it wasn't hard to move towards him because we
Mhm.
felt the beauty of the property that he and his wife fell in
Yep.
love with and were, they were the only reason why they were moving is because their beautiful grandchildren lived 2 hours away.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would not have left that space.
No,
Yeah. Uh,
the beautiful
I've been
property.
reading a book called You're Not Listening
Mm,
by Mary, no, Kate Murphy.
mhm,
And it's really interesting. I mean, some of the normal stuff, kind of some tangible things about learning to listen to people and, don't have your phone out. And
mhm,
she talks about the annoying habits that people have when they think they're supposed to do active listening and you nod your head like you're a robot and
mhm.
you parrot back to them like you're, a droid. I hear you saying that you like white painted houses. Um, and says, it's so much more than that. Learning
Yeah.
to listen to people, and it was interesting because she does a couple chapters or a chapter on improv as a way that joining an improv club is a way of learning how to listen better. Now, you may remember that my older kid did improv in
Yes.
college, was part of a club that actually, as a freshman, their club won the college bowl in Boston for
Oh,
improv. It was
wow. I didn't
very,
know that part of it.
yeah, she had a small role as a freshman, but it was very exciting. It was pre-COVID, back when people did stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so
That's good.
I was confirming with her about some of these details because I admit that I did a lot of camp skits in my time that felt like improv. Uh, and it was just a way to showcase the precursor to my dad jokes.
Yeah.
And uh, what my daughter said and what this author said was that that's really disruptive to the improv setting, and that you need to be listening to your teammates, not so that you can find the slot to slip your joke in. Like that's stand-up comedy, that's something else. You need to be listening so that you can pick up what they have and then advance that forward,
Mhm.
even if it's not someplace you would have chosen to go.
Yeah.
And it's actually, for the sake of improv, this isn't necessarily for real estate. It's being in that uncomfortable space you've never been before that
Yeah.
creates the funny moments.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but I think that's part of working with real estate is listening to your clients rather than superimposing on them what it is that you want. So I think about, that your client who wanted the Arizona sunset, you
Yep.
might have said, "No, I think the Jean looks fine in this setting," or what. I'm not sure if she was the Jean person. Her name was Jean in
Her
that
name
part of the
was
story.
Jean.
Yeah. But learning to hear what whoever it is you're interacting with is saying so that you could pick up what they have and advance it rather than superimpose your idea on what you think it should be.
Yeah. So I could give them what they ultimately wanted. I
Right.
needed to be able to translate their vision into technical terms because what I did was I took that proof back to the office and handed off to a technical person who was sitting in front of a computer who didn't know what an Arizona sunset looked like at 5:30 in the afternoon.
Um, I feel like we've got a road trip going. We can catch a couple more spring training games, and we could be down in Arizona for a 5 o'clock sunset. Don't
Absolutely.
We're recording this on a day when it is overcast here in the Bay Area, and
Yeah, it's a
a
little dreary.
warm a warm 80-degree sunset at 5 o'clock sounds really nice about now.
All right, let's go.
All right, I'm booking the tickets. Southwest, here we come. Um,
I
the
I think one of the things about being an active listener is and I'm going to talk about how when we go out to a listing appointment and we're sitting at the kitchen table and we don't know the people and we're nervous and we really want the listing, but we've got to present ourselves in the best light and to try and deal with that anxiety and be a good listener and be a good conversationalist and tell them how great we are without saying we're great. It's really hard to
yeah,
do.
yeah, I find it to be one of the hardest moments. So I had the unusual experience of having to go do a listing appointment without Sherry last week, and it's like I almost forgot how to do it. I mean, it was kind of surprising. I mean, because we get so conversational, and then when there's a drop in the conversation, the other one picks up wherever the conversation needs to go. And so trying to think two or three sentences ahead while you're saying something,
Yeah.
we've gotten out of the practice of doing that. So I only had to say one thing at a time. I can only say
Oh,
one.
that's interesting.
Yeah. Um, I mean, both of us are fully capable of being agents on our own. We both did that for years before we were partners. But
Yeah.
one of the fun things about having a partner is that you can participate being more authentic in the moment because you're not having to think ahead. And I actually think it helps us be better listeners because each time one of us is talking, the other person is listening to the whole conversation. And we sometimes hear things that we wouldn't have been able to hear if only one of us were there.
Mhm.
And I think that is tremendously resourceful for our clients as well as
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. And you have to realize that sometimes what a client is telling you is there's more to it than what they're actually saying.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes they don't want it, they don't talk at all, and you have to kind of drag it out of them. Um,
We've told the story before, but there are these sellers that we worked with a couple years ago who were adamant about, I'm living here, I'm not moving out while you sell it. It's going to sell as is. This is the way it is. And as we were listening to what they really needed, we were then able to pick up the ball from where they took it and advance it to say, well, you're going to have to move at some point anyway. What would it look like for you to do it in this way? And then we can do X, Y, and Z. And that decision to do that netted them several hundred thousand dollars, probably 700,000, several hundred thousand dollars more
yeah,
than if they had stayed in the house
yeah,
because we heard what they needed. It wasn't what they, in that case, it wasn't what they were saying out loud, but we presented to them as an option, not like you must
yeah.
do it. There's an agent in our market space who is pretty infamous for bringing their template on how to sell a house to their clients and like you have to move out, we're going to paint the house this color, we're going to do this, and it's a fairly rigid process,
Mhm.
and it's not a bad process from the standpoint of the houses that get sold are beautiful, they earn top dollar. Yeah,
Mhm.
they definitely know what the agent definitely knows what the market needs. So please, everyone listen to this. This is we're not being critical of it from the standpoint of the end result, but it's not responsive to what the clients need.
Yeah,
And uh, it takes a little bit more listening than it does saying, hey, you can't just lead with, this is the best way to get the most amount of money. Sometimes you need to walk your clients through that journey. And we have clients right now who had a beautiful house. It was colorful in all sorts of, I thought, well done ways,
yeah,
but its buyer pool would have been very small. And so we had to invite our clients into the conversation in a way of, we agree, your house is beautiful, but you'll expand the buyer pool to maybe 80% of the potential buyers rather
yeah,
than 10% of the buyers
yeah,
if we do like what this other agent recommends,
yeah,
but we present it as an option because ultimately it's their house.
yeah. I think it's hard to get someone to trust you the minute you walk in the door. and sit down at their kitchen table. And that's kind of what this requires, is that huge leap of faith that says, you're sitting here, I know you've done this for 25 years. Um, and I know you're the expert, and I'm going to trust you to give me the best advice so that I make the most amount of money on my home. And I don't know that I could do that if someone came in and I didn't know who they were. I'd never met them before.
Especially if the first words out of their mouth is, your style is ugly and we have to fix it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because
Exactly.
that we're not
Exactly.
exactly saying those words, but that's what it feels like. You know, when you start
Yeah.
with, here are all the things you need to do to get your house ready. It's like,
Yep.
we're going to walk you through this and we're going to show you why we might make recommendations, but
Yeah.
it's your house.
Yeah.
We work for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. And, and I mean, they ultimately did end up trusting us. And it didn't all happen at that first appointment. This had to be worked out over several appointments. Even after they hired us, we were still negotiating whether or not that those colorful walls, were going to be painted white. Um, and ultimately, they believed us and
yep,
trusted us. And the painters are there this week, and the house is going to go on the market in the next couple of weeks. So, but it was it. Sometimes you have to hear what the client says and say, "I hear you, I understand you, but I still have different advice for you." And
yep,
that's a hard thing to do.
yep. The This author had a couple other, just simple quips that aren't tremendously insightful. Like, we could all figure it out. Like, we have
Uh,
two ears and one mouth. And that's for a reason. But there was something else that she said that I hadn't heard before. It was, you have eyelids so you can stop seeing something, but you don't have ear flaps so you can stop hearing things.
oh, interesting.
And she's, she possibly, that might be for safety reasons, that even while you're asleep, you might hear things and other things like that. But part of her point was, we probably don't listen very well, um, or as well as we should, as a general rule. And I think, there's little things that we do that make it easier for people to talk to us. And being, there's physical things that we can do while we're present with people to make them feel like we're listening and being heard.
Mhm.
Things like, don't put your phone on the table. Leave it out of sight. Because even if you're not touching your phone, the only reason why you would have it easily accessible would be that you're plan on answering it if it rings.
Yeah,
And that robs the person that you're with of your attention, even just tangentially, because they see it, even if
yeah,
you don't intend on picking it up.
yeah.
I think about one of the things that we do is we check in with our clients is, how do you prefer to be communicated with? So obviously some of this is in-person stuff, but then do you prefer to be texted or emailed or a phone call?
Mhm.
Um, Sherry, do you have a preference of how people contact you?
I like old school phone. I
Yeah.
think you get more done with a phone call than you do with email or text.
So here's a little confession on my part. I don't love talking on the phone, even though
That
I
is,
am an extrovert. And there's a couple things I'm going to compliment Sherry on right here,
Mhm,
because she will call me out on that in particular. Like, just pick the phone up and call the person and you can solve it. Whatever the question is, you don't want to give the hard truth. You don't
mhm.
want to text the hard truth. Just call the person. And she's
Yep.
always right. But the other thing is that
Wait, what did you say?
she's right. Sherry and I have a rule that on odd days she's right and on even days I'm right. So I don't know if today's an odd day, but it feels like it. Um
Well, sometimes I say, why don't you let me call?
uh
Because I know how much you hate talking on the phone, and you'll let me pick up the phone and call and
yeah.
get it
Uh,
done.
yeah, I'm trying to mature my way past that. Um but So Sherry and I we're in different spaces while we record the podcast, but typically our desks are right next to each other. She sits right over here, and so I get to listen to all her phone calls. Very rarely are we doing personal phone calls. We need privacy, so we're listening to all it. And I hear some of the most remarkable conversations and the kind of data and information that you would never get by just texting, hey, here's the closing date or whatever it is. Because in those conversations is when we as agents pick up on all sorts of secondary information that's not available unless you know between the lines. And occasionally I hear some really wacky things, like
Like
she
the
was
day
talking.
that my mom tried to talk me into marrying my cousin because his wife had just died and he was looking for a new wife.
Yeah, well, there was that day. I was thinking about the time when you were talking to a client and you said, "You're digging a grave?" And I was
And
talking
she
to actually
was.
the same client on a different day, and he's um, the cars and trucks were floating down the street or something like that, uh, or uh, or she said something like, "There's a brothel in the house across the street."
She did say that.
Yeah, she did say
She
that.
wasn't right, by the
No,
way.
she wasn't.
She was
Uh,
a character.
but she was digging a grave. Um,
Yes, for those of you who live in Texas, apparently, if you dig your own grave, you can save money on your burial. So
exactly,
you heard it here
exactly.
first.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, talking on the phone, that's always a good thing to do. Um,
Especially when you're having a problem. Problems can't be resolved in a text.
yeah.
You gotta have a phone call.
Well, and there's a couple things about that, and not that we're intending to be deceptive, and not things have things on the record for the court date later, but sometimes things get in writing that should never be in writing, and they can be mistaken. They were, whether it's a autocorrect or a typo
Yeah,
or some other confusion, and so
yeah,
sometimes the clarity of a phone call is important because you don't have it's harder to make a mistake that or misunderstanding that you might have in a text, and just kind of by best practices then you should follow up with an email per our phone conversation. This is what we agreed upon, and so you
yeah,
put it in writing after you've talked about it, but
yeah,
it's easier to have a little give and take.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that, things, I mean, we're talking now really nuts and bolts about communication. I think having regular contact with your clients in writing as well as phone calls, depending on what it is. For instance, when we're working with sellers, we give them in writing updates after the weekend open houses. This is how many people came through, conversations we had, so they know what's going on. Because every once in a while, you hear a story about, well, my agent signed the listing agreement and I haven't talked to them in 2 weeks or a month, and it just seems
Yeah,
outrageous that we
yeah,
wouldn't have that kind of level of communication.
yeah. Sometimes clients tell you things that they don't realize they're how important it is. And we keep going back to this situation a couple years ago with this couple that needed to move and they didn't want to we're not doing any work and we're not moving out. You're selling it as is. But in that same conversation, they said, we only have $25,000 left in our checking account. That's
Yeah.
all cash we have in the world. They were retirees. And he'd lived longer than they thought he was going to live, and he was in great shape. He was going to go and keep going as far as everybody knew.
Yeah.
But hearing them say we only have $25,000, when someone can be that vulnerable with their agent
Yeah.
that they just met for the first time, we have to pay attention to that because in our heads, we were like, well, if they don't move out, we might get them $800,000, from the sale of this home after all of their closing
Yeah.
costs. But if they move out and let us paint and let us update a few things, and we don't have to deal with it showings for a family that has 4 cats, we might get them $200,000 more than we originally thought. And that's a lot of money to somebody who is, down
I
to
don't
their last
know. Yeah.
$200,000.
Yeah.
And having the courage to say, we hear you, we know you don't want to move, it's a pain in the butt, it's inconvenient, but you're going to have to move anyway, which was your idea, Adam. I love the way you said that to them. You're going to have to move anyway, and you're going to move into a rental until you have the money to, from the sale of the home so that you can decide where you want to ultimately live. And it made sense to them.
Yeah.
And in one appointment, an hour-long appointment, we had,
Oh, it was more than an hour.
I guess it was more like a 2-hour appointment.
Sorry.
It was a long appointment,
Yeah.
but we got them from we're not moving to you guys need to leave so we can start packing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, literally,
Yeah.
because we heard something that we heard something beyond we're not moving and we're not doing any work. We heard we only have $25,000.
yeah. I think one of the things that's helpful to be able to be responsive to clients like that is having multiple tools in your tool belt.
Mhm,
Because like the one agent that I mentioned earlier that has a plan for listing a house,
mhm,
sometimes we have one tool, it's a hammer. And when
mhm.
your one tool is a hammer, every problem is a nail. And when you come across a screw, you don't really know what to do with it.
Oh, wow.
And so the listening is the part of what's important about that listening to our clients is figure out, do we have a hammer? I mean, do we have a nail or a screw? It's
Yeah,
like, oh, we have a screw. Then, oh, we need to grab a different a tool out
yeah,
of our tool belt because what's needed here is different. And so if you're not listening, if you come in as an agent to a listing appointment with, here's the cookie cutter idea about how to sell a house
yeah,
without any breadth of knowledge, you may not be giving that client the best service and you
yeah.
won't be hearing them because all you're doing, like the amateur improv guy, you're waiting for your joke. You're like, oh, that sounded like something like a nail. Let me just jump on it with my hammer.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
but listening to the sensitivity of like that particular client, it's like they had something different than a nail, which was, hey, we want to whitewash your house and do all this. Um, we need to help you get financially and physically into a rental from here. How can we help you do that? That's our number one priority is to make that a reality. And we help them with getting storage containers. And I mean, we did a little legwork for them. They took care of that on themselves. Although I think I did lock their storage container, the last storage container when they came to pick it up. But
I think you loaded the last one because they at the last minute they didn't have a big enough pod. Oh no. Okay, yeah. Never mind.
um, pre-hip replacement. The it was
It was a
yeah.
little container.
There's oftentimes, yes, it was a overflow container. There are oftentimes that we do expand our role as real estate agents because
Yeah,
it's what our clients need.
yeah,
I just don't want people hiring us like, oh yeah, Adam packs storage containers.
yeah.
We'll hire them.
Exactly. That's a
Um,
full service agent.
yeah, but it was, this is kind of what's fun. A couple of weeks ago we were talking with Ann Klein about the puzzle of real estate,
Mhm.
and one of the fun things about doing this is that you're dealing with real people with real needs and interests and limitations and trying to figure out what is it that's in my tool belt that's available to us that we can help them the most. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously we're still everybody puts a sign up, everybody lists on MLS, but what
yeah,
are the things that we do in between those two things so that our clients have the best experience? And the only way that happens, it starts with good listening and good communication skills
yeah.
and all of that. All right. Any final thoughts about communication? I'm sure we could talk about it for a long time, but
No, I think we've covered a lot of the things that we deal with on a daily basis.
yeah. Um, all right. Well, the one last thought I was going to say is you can't be thinking about what your next answer is while you're listening. You got to listen to what the person is saying directly in front of you. And we hope that you've been able to hear about how we work. We hope that if you've been our past client, you felt like we've been good listeners. We're always trying
Mhm.
to improve on that skill set.
Yep.
If you like this podcast, be sure to like and subscribe and recommend it to your friends and family. And we will be back next week for a new podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.